have to have a good sense of what might be a hit, because a hit basically means that a lot of people liked it. In order for a lot of people to like something, it has to have something special about it. And sometimes it can be really hard having an idea when things might be successful and when they won't, because sometimes you know, you have to tell people, I don't think you've got a hit single here. And that can be a very hard thing. People won't accept it, you know, but what can you do? And it still happens, you know. You make a record and there's no hit single. You can't really manufacture that, you know, either. You know, it's got to come from some kind of an inspiration. Somebody has to be inspired. There has to be something. They have to be saying something. The older I get, the more concerned I am, really, with when I listen to songs, with what people are actually saying. What are you saying? What are you saying to people? It's a communication medium. What's your message? The message might be, here, look at me, I'm beautiful and I'm wearing nice clothes. That's fine, you know. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what you're saying, you know. But if you're not saying anything, then it's not going to appeal to anybody, and nobody will be interested. Single songs haven't changed that much. I mean, people tear them apart and reconstruct them and do funny things, and lots of records these days are just made up from a couple of good ideas that are sort of repeated in a good way, you know, with lots of sounds, but they never stay around for as long. A really good song is quite a rarity. I think every year you might hear two. I have to be honest. I'm always very rude about songwriters, you know, professional songwriters, because I'm the one that has to sort out their crap. You know what I mean? And most of those songs, you know, they're just written from the point of view of somebody not really feeling anything. I'd much rather fix up a song that somebody's written. You know, the Lexicon of Love, that album. He'd written that whole album because when he was at university, a girl had rejected him, Martin Fry. And it was the girl that says goodbye on The Look of Love was the girl that rejected him. We got her in to say just that one bit. And because she'd rejected him, all of those lyrics are his anger about the rejection. And that's what makes them so potent. And if you don't have that kind of, you know, I don't know what, you know, obviously, if you don't have that kind of communication in the song will never last and nobody will ever like it. And I often get into arguments with people about singles too, because it's not enough to, you know, a good song or a good single should have at least 4 or 5 ideas in it. You can't just do it with 2. You can't have a verse and a chorus. It makes me angry sometimes. I get songs and they're just a verse and a chorus. And there's nothing, what can I do with it? There's no intro, there's no middle eight, and you have to, you know, sometimes you have to make them, you know, you have to figure out the intro, figure out the middle eight, all those kinds of things. And I don't get any songwriting credit for that. The songwriter earns all the money, but they didn't finish it off.
Early on, this would be a cause often of conflict, you know, that you would get in the studio and that they would do the song and then you'd listen to it and you say, you know, something is not quite right in this lyrical resolve. You know, you changed tenses in the middle of the phrase, or you changed person in the middle of the phrase, you know, things like that. And we would have, you know, I might get into like long-winded discussions about it, you know, with someone. And I realized at a certain point that first of all, it'd be better to avoid that conflict, but also it would be better to reinforce certain things with the artist before the process starts. And that's when I got into the habit of demanding to hear all the material before going into the studio. But it's not simply, that isn't the only reason why you want to hear all the material before you go in the studio, because what often happens is you go in and you realize that the material is like, maybe like this, and that, or or that the artist had a certain unfounded confidence in their ability, you know, to finish a song that they can walk into the studio unfinished with.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, they don't, you know, and then you're like nearing the end of the record and you're just barely eking the material out, you know.
Yeah.
So, in terms of my priorities, I believe that they follow a more or less typical listener's priorities, which is the very first and most important thing is the song. People will listen to a cruddy version of a great song and still get a lot of enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, right. So what makes a good song? What in your opinion, what you know, are there elements that you look for when you're looking for songs? And things
Well, first of all, there are you know, there are not a whole lot of rules about what you can write about.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, songs can be about anything, but there's usually, when someone comes at you with 12, 14 songs, there's usually going to be some sort of focus in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the most challenging aspect of it is determining first of all, what the lyrical or emotional center of that is, and how far away each piece of material is from that. And then establishing what the boundary is, you know, and saying, okay, this song is in, this song is out.
Right.
And then ultimately coming up with enough of those to fill up a record. But, you know, when it gets down to the individual songs, the thing that almost all songwriters have the most trouble with is the lyrics.
Yeah.
In that songwriters often don't think of themselves as poets, but to be an effective songwriter, you have to understand certain of the rules of writing poetry. One of the rules is you don't come like straight at it or it isn't poetry, you know. That can be evidenced best by by the song Fridays by Rebecca Black, you know, in which all she's doing is just describing, you know, completely literally everything she's doing.
Right, there's no metaphor there.
Yeah, I'm getting up, I'm brushing my teeth, I'm eating breakfast, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, that's not particularly poetic, you know, until she gets to the fun, looking forward to the weekend. So, you know, that would be one aspect, you know, of lyric writing. The other is, as I say, trying to make sense,
Sure.
which often, you know, escapes some people, you know, that they, when I say you change person in the middle of the song, they say, what does that mean? Well, I said, well, you started out talking about she, and then it was suddenly you,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and, you know, before you even finish the freaking phrase, so.
You know, what makes a good song has sort of changed over time. The most important element is the storytelling, and songs to me are like movies, where you have a story, you also have a main character, and then you have all the scoring around the story, which is, in the case of songs, it's very important, even more so than in movies, which is already pretty important in movies. But I think it has to be believable. I think the audience has to believe that it actually happened to that main character. To me, like the whole production, arranging, you know, and everything has to be around that story, just to help the story become more emotional and more believable to the listener. And that's how I approach pretty much everything, even if it's music that's a little more dancey or whatever. It's just I still think there's a main character that has to be believable. It's just like exactly like in movies. Most of that, 90% of the time, I usually go for the song first and then do an arrangement around it. And I try to make the arrangement as exciting as it needs to be, or as solemn as it needs to be, depending on the lyrics and the melody and the artist, of course. And I hear a certain intro so that it sets up that first verse in a certain way. And I hear that at this point, we really need to go really big so that it has a certain effect Now, when I go the other way, which is do a track first and then write a song around it, it's a much more, it's a different, obviously, it's totally different for me because you're trying to create this live, almost jazz vibe where everybody's just reacting to what's there. And there's, I try to be a little less intellectual. I try to just let it flow. And you have to work really fast when you do that because when you start thinking a lot, it just all goes down and nothing makes sense anymore. So, and I'm a lot into storytelling, and it's harder for me to tell a story when that whole background is already set up. So I have to fit in there. But it's very interesting too when I see it happen, and when I force myself to do it, something completely different happens, which is really cool too.
Record for Jennifer Lopez called All I Have.
Mm-hmm.
From her This Is Me Then album back in, I want to say 02, 03. And it wound up coming out and going number one. It was featuring Cool J. Came out, went number one on the Hot 100 Hot 100 charts for 5 weeks.
Wow.
And after that, then Puffy came calling like, I have to sign you, I have to get you on my team.
Right.
You know, at that time I was the only female writer, and just bringing a new energy to his camp, and that's how I got started. And from there, just spiraled into working with artists like Toni Braxton. I had a top 10 hit on her. Worked with Fantasia. Worked with Jessica Simpson, and from there, that led to Beyonce and Rihanna and all of those guys.
Right.
You always want the hook, the chorus, to be so simple that a 2-year-old could remember it after they hear it one time. And then the verses really tell the story. You can get more in depth about what actually happened, but in the hook, it's like so general and so simple and something that everyone can remember. So, yeah.
Well, it sure works. I often tell my students that a good chorus is one that you can sing the second time it comes around.
Yeah.
And a great chorus is one you can sing before it ends the first time. You can sing it
A
the
great
first time.
chorus is one that you hear one time and you go home and you can't get that hook out of your head. It's just playing in your head. And that's a lot of times how we know in the studio, like, okay, we've hit that magic spot, because that chorus is just so strong, can't get it out of our heads.
Right. It's such a discipline to simplify.
It is such a discipline. You want to throw every harmony on the keyboard in the song. You want to throw every word from the dictionary. And you just can't do that because, one, there's not enough time. The song is at the longest for radio. It can't go beyond 3 minutes, 3 minutes and 12 seconds, I think. So you just have to really find a way to squeeze a whole story into 3 minutes and make it great and make it visual like a movie.
Right.
Today I was working on a song for one of the X Factor artists, and it was tough because the verse was so short. The verse was 8 bars.
Right.
And I had so much to tell about this story before we got to the hook. And the hook is like massive, but the verses always have to set that up, and it has to make sense.
Right.
So, the producer and I were going back and forth for hours about, how can we fit this story into 8 bars? So that's really important.
That's tough.
Well, that's something. It's something special if you can get an artist to trust you in that way and trust that your opinion of what's a stunning vocal is right. I would say, first of all, work on perfecting your own demos as writers, as producers. Some producers write as well as do their own demos. And once you can get your demo sounding a certain way, the artist and the label will hear it and say, hey, I want it to sound just like that. And then you go in, and depending on what type of voice the artist has, you have to really help them get the song as close to the demo as possible.
Ok, a ver. Algunas cositas en torno a lo que acabamos de ver.